Welcome to Running Hot, Action Network's motorsports betting podcast. I'm your host, Nick Giffen, predictive analyst here at Action Network. And joining me, as always, my co-host, Stephen Young of Roto Grinders, better known as Stevie TPFL. And this week, we're talking bets for the Brickyard 400 at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway here on Running Hot. Last weekend at Pocono Raceway, Ryan Blaney took home his second win of the season. He was able to hold off Denny Hamlin, who had the fastest car, but did not have the track position there late, and Alex Bowman rounding out the top three. Couple of rough days for some guys on the points bubble. Ross Chastain crashes out. Ty Gibbs blew an engine. So that kind of closes the points there for them. Ross Chastain, now the bubble boy on the playoffs, and Bubba Wallace with a solid day running top 10, closes the gap to Ross Chastain, and now is within striking distance of being able to point his way into the playoffs if we don't get a new winner. So a little bit of an interesting playoff picture we have now here, Stevie, with Bubba closing the gap to the next three in front of him, which are, of course, Chastain, Chris Buescher, and Ty Gibbs there. So definitely interesting. What were your thoughts on Pocono and thoughts on this playoff scenario?
Yeah, I mean, thoughts on Pocono, a lot of strategy. Like we kind of talked about last week, who stayed out, who didn't. And I mean, Blaney, I feel like, was fantastic on strategy. They made a lot of right calls and they got him track position and he had a fast enough car to win the race. So, I mean, we look at like speed, he was like second in speed because he had great track position all day. He wasn't up there at the beginning of the race. But, yeah, he won the race, and it wasn't like it was an undeserving win. Blaney had a really good car, so that kind of shocked me a little bit. Ford had more speed than I expected. Toyota was really fast like we expected and just terrible on strategy. So it's just one of those things. You know, the whole race changed for me when all those pit penalties happened towards the end, 30, 35 laps to go, where Larson, Ty Gibbs, there was a bunch, Chase Elliott, the whole race changed. So, but overall, Pocono was Pocono. I mean, you can't really pass the leader still. That's something that I think that is really needed in the Cup Series. But I mean, it was okay.
Yeah, it was fine. I mean, it was fine. I love Pocono, and this was definitely not one of my favorite Pocono races just from a watching standpoint. So I'm right there with you. But you're right. You know, the Toyotas were really fast. They had, I think it was like 4 of the top 7 or 8 cars in speed. It just didn't pan out for them. You know, Denny Hamlin, they held him in the pits a little bit longer to really top him off on fuel. And it turns out he didn't end up needing it because we had a bunch of cautions in the third stage and that cost him track position. So yeah, interesting race there. Definitely Ford had more speed than we thought. And, you know, I thought Chevy, aside from maybe Chase Elliott, was a little down, especially with Kyle Larson. He just didn't have a great race. Chase Elliott looked fast. William Byron and Alex Bowman are kind of where you expect them to be. So it's not like Chevy was super good as we head into Indianapolis. So those might be some things to consider. But also, real quick, Stevie, playoff picture here. It's getting kind of tight there. And, you know, a new winner could also throw a wrench in all of this.
Yeah, it's really tight as far as like Gibbs and Buescher now. Martin Truex with another really, really good day. He's looking really good on the points front, where even if he doesn't win a race, I think that he's good on the points. He might be able to be more aggressive this weekend at the Brickyard with strategy instead of trying to get stage points. But yeah, I mean, you have to think we have plenty of races left. We have Daytona coming up. There's going to likely still be one more new winner, which puts like Gibbs, Buescher, Chastain, Bubba as like the only 4 drivers that are like there on the bubble that have a chance. I mean, I think we can kind of assume Briscoe, Busch, Gillen, Berry, McDowell, they have to win. They're not getting in anymore by points. So I think if you're Ross Chastain and you're Bubba Wallace, you're like, we still probably are not getting in on points. We got to go out and win a race. Gibbs probably still feels okay, but I mean, I'd be nervous if I was him. So I think it's fantastic where we're at and that we're talking about this here with, you know, a few races before we get to the playoffs. But I mean, we have this weekend, we got Daytona coming up and we have, I mean, Darlington, and Darlington's a racetrack where I can name 3 people below the cut line that can win at Darlington. So should be really fun.
Yeah, no, and you're right. Like Gibbs definitely still has to worry. I mean, he was 40 something points ahead of Buescher going into Pocono.
Yep.
Coming out of Pocono, he's 40 points ahead of Ross, but he's only 23 ahead of Buescher. So it shows you can lose like 15, 18, 20 points to a single driver in a single race with a bad day. And Ty Gibbs, while he had a bad day, it wasn't as bad as it could have been because he still finished 27th instead of in the 30s like Ross Chastain did, who finished 36. So there's potential to lose even more there with another bad race. So certainly Gibbs, Buescher, Chastain, Bubba Wallace, none of them safe, but none of them are also in or out, right? Like, so they all could point their way in. They all could certainly use a win to get in. And I thought something that was interesting from Pocono, which we'll talk about for Indy here, was if you look at the top 10 in stage 1 and the top 10 in stage 2, 9 of the 10 drivers are either in or Truex, who we think is very safe in terms of stage points in both stages at Pocono. The only one that wasn't was Eric Jones and needs a win to get in. So all these guys that we talked about who might be points racing, which are the 4 drivers we just listed, didn't end up points racing, right? So something to keep in mind here for Indy as well. But let's talk about Indianapolis Motor Speedway. It is a 2.5 mile flat track, the famed Indianapolis Motor Speedway, which hosts IndyCar's Indianapolis 500, but NASCAR running the Brickyard 400 for the first time since 2020. So we have not run the Indy Oval in the next gen car. We didn't run it in 2021, which was the last year of the Gen 6 car. So it's been a while since we've had some racing at Indy, Stevie. But what traditionally has Indy racing been like in the NASCAR Cup Series? And can we expect more of the same or any bit different with the next gen car?
Yeah, I mean, in racing at Indy has been all over the place. Back in the day when the car was different and they could skew the cars so much, the racing was pretty good here. The reason that we stopped racing here is because the racing got so bad. And I think that this is a good car for Indy Oval instead of like Indy Road Course. And like, I didn't necessarily hate the Indy Road Course. I just thought like they could have maybe done it a little differently when they built it, but who knows? It wasn't really built for cup cars, to be on it when they built it. So, I mean, I think we're going to see good racing, a lot of drafting, a lot of strategy again. This is another race where the racetrack's so big you can short pit and have some strategy, but it really, like, overall, it is when you ask like what kind of racing, it really is just kind of dependent on the car. That like all the generation cars have produced all types of different racing at Indy. So I think we're going to see a lot of drafting and we're going to see a lot of speed. Pocono with the 3 corners and how it's kind of different. You don't have that necessarily at Indy, even though it's probably the best comp, and we just raced there last weekend. So I think people that were fast at Pocono are going to be fast at Indy this weekend.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think we need to dive too much into comps because Pocono is definitely the best comp for Indy. I will say, Indy's corners are more consistent, right? Pocono has 3 different corners with 3 different radiuses and 3 different bankings. Indy's are much more consistent. They're all 90-degree turns. Obviously the 2 long straightaways will have a little bit faster entering speeds than the 2 short shoot turns, but overall much more consistent and still a lot of speed at Indy. Track position, I think, just like Pocono, is going to be important. So that brings in some of those longer shots into play if they get on the right strategy and have track position late. We've seen some guys win on strategy at Indy. Paul Menard, for example, holding off Jeff Gordon with some fuel strategy back in 2011, for example. We've seen Ryan Newman win when he was kind of on the twilight of his career. So definitely can have some surprise winners, or some surprise strong finishes here. So I do think some long shots are in play. Maybe not necessarily for the win, but top 10 type finishes. But yeah, mostly using Pocono. I think you can pull in a little bit of other intermediate track stuff, higher speed intermediate, especially because Indy is a little more intermediate-like with its consistent corners and its speed. So faster corners than Pocono typically. So I do think you can pull in a little bit of intermediate horsepower type stuff with Indy than you can with Pocono. But any other thoughts before we dive into our bets here, Stevie?
We said it last week, and I think we should, again say it this week. Recent speed matters. Who's been fast. If you look at who was fast last week at Pocono, I mean, we could have probably pinpointed 7 of the top 10 in speed. I was a little surprised by some of the Ford speed. That threw me off. I'm not going to sit here and act like it didn't. Like, I did not expect like Chris Buescher and Brad Keselowski to be as good as they were. So that threw me for a loop. William Byron was solid, but he wasn't great. He had great strategy. Alex Bowman was solid, but he had great strategy. So like, Bowman ranked outside the top 10 in speed for me. Byron was like very close. I think he was like 9th or 10th in speed. So like realistically, the only Chevy that was in the top like 8 drivers was Chase Elliott. And he was one of the ones that had a penalty and was able to like actually drive back through the field a little bit. He had such a good race car. So it would have been interesting had Chase Elliott not got the penalty late in that race to see if he would have been able to compete with Blaney and Hamlin. But I mean, Chevy didn't show up. Ford showed up. Toyota, they were really fast. So just kind of going off of that.
Yeah, definitely. Chevy, I think, will bounce back here. They've honestly traditionally have been pretty strong in Indy. I'm not using a whole bunch of past Indy stuff to handicap this race. Like, if you were good at Indy in the past, I don't really care because it was a different car. That was 4 years ago at least. Different
the racing
tires.
The racing is so different than it was when we were here in like 2019, 2020. Like, the racing's way different.
Exactly. So I'm not really using past Indy history, although I will say Chevy overall has been strong. They make a lot of good horsepower. Traditionally Chevy has been strong at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. If you look there, every year from 2003 to 2014, Chevy won the Brickyard 400. It's like 11 years.
Was that the Gordon Johnson era though? Like, yeah
exactly. It was, but Tony Stewart was running a Chevy. Jamie McMurray won a year. Kevin Harvick won in a Chevy back when he was with RCR. Paul Menard in a Chevy, Newman in a Chevy. So there was a period of time where Chevy was just dominating the Brickyard. So I think they'll be strong this weekend. But let's dive into those bets for the Brickyard 400. As always, we're going to take you for a lap around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. 4 turns, 1 pick from Stevie, 1 pick from me in each turn. Before we drive into victory lane, so we're going to throw the green flag on one of the crown jewels of NASCAR, the Brickyard 400, and dive into turn 1. Okay, turn 1, Stevie. We were on this guy last week for a top 10. I know I was, and then I think I convinced you. Looks like you're back for another top 10 bet. Who is it?
Another guy that had plenty of speed last week. Like, he had top 15 type speed. Came out and put down a scorcher of a lap in qualifying. Josh Berry, top 10, plus 210. This line is moving. So I'm jumping on this one pre-qualifying, pre-practice, because, I mean, the guy has just been so consistent in qualifying this year when he has a good car. And the bet doesn't hit if he doesn't have a good car. So I'm jumping on it now. I really like this. We keep talking about Rodney Childers and how much of a difference he makes for Josh Berry. Well, we just got done saying it, right? Like, Kevin Harvick was phenomenal at the Brickyard. They're going to have a good plan coming into this racetrack, and Josh Berry has had plenty of speed. So I think if we just look at the speed that he's had and compare that to what he's been able to do with Rodney Childress last week, like I said, he was a top 15 car. Got to clean up some pit road stuff. They were aggressive on strategy. Josh Berry has to win. There's no more racing for points. He's so far behind the cut line that, Rodney Childress is going to be aggressive pit strategy-wise. Can Josh Berry win this race? I think the answer to that question is yes. We talked about how you have all kinds of ways you can win this race. Well, I mean, Rodney Childress is going to take some risk here to try to pick up a win. I really like Josh Berry for a top 10 at plus 210.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially given his speed last week. Ran into some bad luck in that race at Pocono, which is why he ended up finishing 20th, but had a very strong car. I think I can get behind that plus 210 number as well. So maybe when I add to my card, I don't actually have a turn 1 pick. My turn 1 pick is wait for practice and qualifying. We haven't run this race in 4 years, right? So we're not quite sure who's going to be good, who's going to hit it with this tire, at this track. Are the tires going to hold up at this track? We've seen tire problems at Indy before. So I don't want to get too deep into my card this week, early on in the week. And last week, obviously I had I was at the ER, so I took last weekend off. So I didn't make any post-practice and qualifying bets. But what I saw from other people making bets was there was some value out there post-practice and qualifying, especially some matchup value. So I think we can get some of that again this week. And I do think overall the market has maybe, I wouldn't say overreacted, but they've made Denny Hamlin really short, right? Like he is a very heavy favorite in this race. The longest odds out there are 5-1 on Denny Hamlin. And rightly, he should be the favorite. But again, I had him 15.5% last week. I have him around 16.5% this week. So that's not quite value at 5-1. And then there's Larson at 7-1. And then you can get double digits on every single other driver, right? So there's a lot of value out there right now. And I think with the way books a little overreact to practice and qualifying, if Denny Hamlin puts it up near the front, we could see just tons of value after practice and qualifying if he shortens to like 4 or 3-1 everywhere. So I'm going to wait a little bit this week, Stevie. I don't want to get too deep into my card here early in the week.
And I don't disagree with the books as having like Hamlin as a huge favorite. Like he's been the fastest on this type of racetrack. He did the tire test here last month. Like it was him, Todd Gillen, and Kyle Busch. And like, how much information is Todd Gillen really going to give Ford? Like he's a great driver, but he's young. Kyle Busch should be able to give Chevy a ton of information, but Denny Hamlin's going to come really fast. So like, I understand why he's the favorite, but there's too much strategy stuff that can happen. They stayed out to win a stage this past weekend. Like there is going to be some value pre or post practice and qualifying, like Nick said. So I actually added to my card last week, and those are like two of the bets that I ended up winning. So I'm with you as far as waiting and not getting too full on your card here.
Yeah, so turn one, Stevie is on Josh Berry for a top 10 finish at plus 210. I am going to punt a little bit on turn one and just have 3 turn picks this week because I want to wait for some practice and qualifying, see where we're at in a track we haven't been to in 4 years. I should say we've been to the track, but not the oval in 4 years. So we've gone through turn one, time to head down the short stretch and dive into turn two. All right, turn two, Stevie, another top 10 bet for you here. Who you got this time?
Yeah, so I like top 10 bets pre-practice qualifying. We talk about this all the time. And I'm just going to playing the momentum card here a little bit. We got Alex Bowman, who just picked up his first win in forever. They played a fantastic race as far as strategy last week at Pocono. He did not have a third place car, but they absolutely nailed the strategy. And when you have that momentum and things are going right for you, I'm going to take some shots on you when I can get you at plus money. So we're getting Alex Bowman top 10 at plus 120. I like this down to plus 105. I'm showing value on even money here. So jumping on this one because the momentum, it really nothing else besides momentum. He had enough speed last week to be a top 10 car, which is fine. And they nailed the strategy, playing the momentum card here with Alex Bowman pre-practice qualifying.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Alex Bowman looked, honestly, I know he was only 12th in speed at Pocono, but he looked a lot better, I think, than that speed shows. Obviously, also had really good strategy. So right there with you, when you're a borderline top 10 car in speed and you're getting plus money, I think a top 10 bet makes a lot of sense, especially at plus 120. Like you said, down to plus 105, I think is probably where that cutoff should be. For my turn two pick, I'm going right back to the well I went to last week. I took last week Ricky Stenhouse Jr. finishing position under 20.5. That didn't work out. He got caught up in that Corey LaJoie, Kyle Busch wreck where ruined a lot of my bets, actually. So that was
Me and
fun.
You both.
Yeah. But, Ricky Stenhouse prior to that looked good. He was running inside the top 15 at some points in that race and definitely inside the top 20 for a lot of that race and just obviously had the bad luck there. And now his line is 23.5 for Indy Motor Speedway. The Brickyard 400, and it's plus money. It's plus 105 for under 23.5. So I'm just going to go right back to the Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Well, has had a lot of speed this year at intermediate tracks, especially some of the faster intermediate tracks, your Kansas, Vegas. So Texas, can't forget that. And looked good enough at Pocono to be running borderline top 20 inside the top 20 for a lot of it. So 23.5. I love those 3 extra places. And we're getting plus money this week. Last week it was 20.5 with minus 115 to the under. Now we're getting 23.5 with plus 105 to the under. So just right back to the well, Stevie. I'm not worried about him crashing out. I'm not worried about his Brickyard 400 history. It's not good simply because he's crashed out of every single one, it seems like, back when he raced the Brickyard 400, right? He had his first and second year, he wasn't very good, but he was also a rookie in a second year. Then he crashed a bunch, and he had one non-crash finish after his second year, and he finished inside the top 20. So as long as he doesn't have major problems, I think he has a very good shot to finish inside the top 20, let alone the top 23.
Yeah, I mean, even if you look at his average running position from Pocono is 23.0, which means that, he had enough speed to already hit this last week. He had, obviously, the issue with LaJoie hooking Kyle Busch. No one's going to change my mind. That's what happened. But overall, I feel like Stenhouse has had plenty of speed this season, just not just in general. So I don't think you're necessarily too concerned about getting him at this number. So I like Stenhouse. I think Stenhouse is a very talented race car driver, and they kind of had that really slow start to the season as far as speed. But if we look recently, they started to turn it up, and they're always a team that's going to be aggressive strategy-wise. So, again, strategy matters when you're at a racetrack like this.
Absolutely. Strategy matters. There's been some attrition in the past at Indy. Don't know if that'll come into play, but there's a lot of uncertainty. And when there's uncertainty, even if you're a 25th place car, you're going to finish inside the top 23 a lot of the time when there's uncertainty and you're not part of the bad side of the uncertainty there. So we've completed half a lap at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, 1.25 miles. We're heading down that really long backstretch towards turn 3. But before we get there, I want to remind you all Running Hot is presented by BetMGM. Use bonus code ACTION when signing up to get up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. For new users in Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Alrighty, 2 turns to go. Turn 3 is very much like turn 1 at Indianapolis. So let's dive into the faster turn 3. Turn 3, another top 10 bet for you, Stevie. You said you liked the top 10 bets early in the week. 3 for 3 right now. Who you got in turn 3?
Yeah, so I'm showing a little bit of value here on Ty Gibbs' top 10 at minus 129. This guy has been absolutely stellar at qualifying this year. So, if you're betting his top 10 or his outright or any Ty Gibbs bet, you're likely doing it pre-practice and qualifying because they just have been consistently good in qualifying. Obviously, he had the pole last week. Absolutely strong car that got loose after the incident with Gregson and ended up going from first to fifth and never kind of rebound, but it's so hard to pass in the top 5 because all the cars were so good. Had good strategy, engine blew. So I think that we just kind of write that one off. I know JGR's had a lot of engine issues in the Xfinity and Cup Series this year. I don't think this is a concern overall, but it is definitely something to note. But again, Ty Gibbs, top 10, minus 129. I'm just showing value, and I'm just going to keep betting on this kid because he has speed everywhere. He's just really fast, and the win is coming. It's just coming.
Oh, absolutely. The win's totally coming. Ty Gibbs, too good, too talented to, not be somebody to consider for a win in a lot of tracks, most of the tracks, honestly, that we race at. So Ty Gibbs, top 10, minus 129 for Stevie. For me, I'm going to a top 10 bet. I'm joining you on the top 10 train. I'm going to take Bubba Wallace plus 135. You can get that at BetMGM, of course. And, Bubba pulled off the top 10 last week, and he had an interesting Pocono. He was really fast in practice, but the balance wasn't there, so he missed it in qualifying. He had a really fast car. That car was fast, but the handling was terrible. So now they've had a week to pour over data on a very similar track. I think they can get the speed and the handling there. And if Bubba has a little bit better qualifying, has an even better shot to finish in the top 10 this week than he did last week. And last week we were getting him, plus 160 all the way down to plus 135 at some places. So plus 135 this week. I still like that number on Bubba Wallace for a top 10 finish. And historically, I know I'm not using a ton of Indy history, but if it counts for anything, this has been one of his better tracks in the Cup Series.
Yeah, I've already bet this one as well. I'm right there with you. As far as Bubba Wallace, just in general, Toyota getting plus money on a Toyota that is a 2311 or JGR car is just pre-practice qualifying insta bets for me. We actually had pretty good value on Bubba Wallace like after practicing qualifying last week as well.
Yep.
So I'm all for Bubba. I think that he is another guy that has a lot of speed right now, and I'm kind of surprised these guys don't have wins. They just need to put together a whole race. You don't have to put together a whole race for a top 10 though. I think Bubba getting him at plus 135 on BetMGM is very solid.
Yeah, so 3 turns down, 1 turn to go. We're going through that short shoot between 3 and 4, and let's take turn 4. All right, final turn. Stevie, you already talked about Ty Gibbs, but you're on another bet for him, and I particularly like this one as well. I may have to tell you on this one.
I was shocked when I saw this line. Ty Gibbs over Joey Logano, minus 105 on BetMGM. Like, there's no... I looked into every statistic possible for this bet, and there's no metric for the last 2 seasons that Ty Gibbs ranks under Joey Logano on, outside of wins, and I don't need him to win this race, but I have Gibbs favored over Logano pretty heavily in this one. So the fact that Logano is heavily, or I wouldn't say heavily, but the fact that Logano is favored over Gibbs here makes me insta-bet this one. I mean, if we look at tracks where we're just looking at like 1.5s and the bigger tracks where we kind of have a little bit of data, Joey Logano's not even close to Ty Gibbs in speed this year. Gibbs is like 7th and Logano's 13th. So in terms of NASCAR, that's not even close. So absolutely love Ty Gibbs for this one. He had more speed than Logano last week before he had the engine issue. It is Paul Wolfe. Paul Wolfe is captain strategy. But I mean, every metric has Gibbs faster than Logano. And now that like Gibbs is struggling in points, like that win would be very nice. So I'm going to go with Gibbs over Logano this week at minus 105.
Yeah, I'm in. I'm not getting too deep this week, but I'm in. I love this bet. And I think a lot of people are looking at Joey Logano's track history here at Indy, which is really good, but he hasn't been that good the last year and a half or so overall. Just he's 16th in speed overall this year among all the tracks, right? Like, I want a guy who is going to be faster than 16th in speed. He was 10th at Pocono, and Ty Gibbs was 7th at Pocono in green flag speed. So even just in the most recent, most comparable track, Ty Gibbs was better than Joey Logano here. So definitely got to get Ty Gibbs minus 105 over Joey Logano at BetMGM. For my turn 4 pick, you can also get this bet at BetMGM. I'm going to take Martin Truex Jr. at 14-1 to win. He was 16-1 earlier this week. I grabbed the 16-1. I didn't track it just because I've been not feeling so great the past handful of time. But once this podcast rolls out, I'll be tracking it at 14-1 here at BetMGM. Martin Truex Jr. had the 3rd best green flag speed at Pocono. But if we do flags, which of course flags track position adjusts and strategy adjusts and everything like that, Denny Hamlin was a clear number 1 in flags at Pocono. Martin Truex Jr. was a clear number 2 in flags at Pocono, much further ahead than 3rd and 4th and beyond like that. So for me, it was Denny and Truex were the 2 best cars at Pocono. Martin Truex Jr. doesn't look like he has the best results at Indy, but I don't care. He's had some good cars at Indy. I remember, I think it was 2017, he and Kyle Busch wrecked each other on a restart going for the lead late in a race when they were teammates. So, there's been a lot of bad luck for Truex at Indy. But certainly I think Martin Truex Jr. very strong at Pocono, should be strong at Indianapolis. Toyota looked great. Toyota had a ton of speed. Looks like they're making great horsepower. So, at a horsepower track, give me Toyotas. I'm going to take Martin Truex Jr. 14-1 to win the Brickyard 400.
Yeah, it's been documented by a bunch of different drivers that they feel like Toyota's making the best horsepower this season. And, obviously they have a new body just like Ford. Maybe we're finally starting to see like Ford and Toyota taking advantage of the new body. I'm with you on this one. I already bet Martin Truex Jr. I was kind of shocked. And like a lot of it has to do with like how short Hamlin and Larson are. But the fact that we're getting Martin Truex Jr., who has just been phenomenal in speed on these types of tracks this year. I mean, he's a top 4 driver in speed on the conventional tracks that, speed matters. So I'm in. I'm in. Like, you're giving me a guy that's top 5 in speed for 14-1. Like, I don't have to second guess that one.
Yeah, I mean, Truex is third in my model behind Hamlin and Larson, right? And we're getting him as the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8th, maybe 8th priced favorite. So absolutely, I am in on Martin Truex Jr. at 14-1. So we have completed the 2.5 mile Indianapolis Motor Speedway lap. That means there's only one thing left to do, and drive in a victory lane. And of course, since it's 2024, we're going to go with Jeff Gordon to win because he won in 1994, he won in 2004, he won in 2014. So he's going to win in 2024, right, Stevie?
Hold on. We got to switch our victory lane pick then. No,
no, Jeff Gordon is not our victory lane pick, but if we were following the trends, he should be winning this week. But no, we're going to your guy who you've talked about in a couple turns, Ty Gibbs. What more needs to be said, Stevie?
Well, the fact that we're getting him at 18-1, it's another a great price that Hamlin and Larson are driving the market to our favor here on a few drivers this week. And the fact that Blaney and Keselowski and these guys had some speed last week, really just kind of overlooking some drivers in the books. The books are anyway. We're not, because we look at a lot of the data and metrics from just not where they finish and stuff. And we're just getting good numbers on Gibbs. Again, this guy, he has way too much speed to post-qualifying bet because he'll be 12-1 or shorter because he'll qualify well. He's been one of the most consistent qualifiers in NASCAR this year. If we look at even just recently, I think he's only qualified outside the top 10, 2 out of the last 8 races. So he's just consistently fast, and we know he's going to have speed. The engine issues played to our favor because we're going right back to the well here at 18-1 on Ty Gibbs. And again, another track where you're hey, this would be an excellent first win for Ty Gibbs.
Absolutely. Yeah, right there with you. Ty Gibbs, 18-1, just a little too long given he was, 7th in speed at Pocono, and probably was a little bit better than that. Obviously, some strategy stuff, some track position stuff. Also, kind of, he was one of those that was a little off strategy, I think, with Josh Berry. So he was actually a little bit better than I think his speed showed. Had to save fuel a little bit at certain points. So Ty Gibbs, probably was a top 5 car at Pocono if all things were equal. And I think if you're getting a top 5 car at 18-1, that's great value, right? Blaney was a top 5 car. He was 17-1 to win Pocono, and he won. So I think Ty Gibbs is in that same boat here. You're getting a guy who has potentially a top 5 car at 18-1 right there with you. So, Steve, that's going to do it for us for a few weeks here. We get a couple weeks off for the Olympics. So any thoughts before we go into Olympic break before we wrap up the show?
I mean, we're going to come back recharged. The NASCAR season's long, and, it's one of those ones where I'll definitely take a week off for sure. And then I'll go back and look at my process because, betting this year has been one of the worst betting years I've ever had. So as far as NASCAR betting. So kind of just look at my process, and I always have, better second halves than I do first halves anyway. So just going to kind of take a week, recharge the batteries. Kind of got to do that this week with the All-Star break, so kind of getting 2 weeks to recharge the batteries a little bit, and then really kind of dig into, is it something I'm doing, or is it just kind of really high variance with the new car, a lot of new tires this year and stuff like that. So I'm gonna enjoy the break though. I love the Olympics. The Olympics are so much fun to watch. So go Team USA.
Absolutely. Go Team USA. I'll be doing a lot of NFL stuff. And then, like you said, looking at the process for NASCAR, because I've always been a second half of the year guy as well in betting, but this has been the worst first half of the year I've had in probably a decade. So, that's how it goes. But that is going to do it for the Brickyard 400 episode of Running Hot Action Network's Motorsports Betting Podcast. Like I said, we'll be back in 3 weeks' time as we talk bets for the Cookout 400 at Richmond Raceway, where we're going to have some interesting tire stuff going on with 2 compounds of tires for the first time in a points-paying race. On behalf of my co-host, Stephen Young, thanks again for listening. We'll see you back here in 3 weeks on Running Hot from Action Network.